The first thing people noticed was the box. A cardboard box, taped, sagging at the corners, stamped with a red marker that screamed eviction like a verdict. It sat on the lobby floor of Caraway Heights, right beside the polished marble fountain nobody used anymore, right under the brass letters that announced luxury living in a tone that sounded like it had never met hunger. And beside that box stood an elderly black couple. He was tall once. You could still tell by the way his shoulders tried to remember a younger shape. Now he leaned on a cane, the rubber tip squeaking against stone as if it was embarrassed to make noise. She held a folded quilt to her chest like it was a shield. The quilt was faded, hand-stitched, the kind of thing that had survived births and funerals and everything in between. Their names were Harold and Ruth Bennett. At that moment, their names didn't matter. What mattered, at least to the men in uniforms, was that they were in the wrong place, in the wrong way, at the wrong volume. You can't just squat in a building like this, the property manager said, loud enough to perform his righteousness for the whole lobby. His name tag read Bradley Holt. His tie was too bright for mourning. His jaw was set like a padlock. Ruth flinched at the word squat as if it had been thrown at her. She took a half step back, then steadied herself. The quilt lifted with her breath. Harold didn't move. He didn't argue either. He just watched Bradley with eyes that had seen enough storms to recognize when one was manufactured. "We are not squatting," Ruth said softly. "We've lived here 12 years. Bradley scoffed, turning his body slightly so the bystanders could see his disbelief. 12 years, he repeated, like it was a joke someone had told badly. In this building. A few people in workout gear had paused near the elevators, earbuds dangling. A woman in a blazer held her latte midi, frozen between sip and judgment. Two college-age guys, maybe visiting someone upstairs, hovered with that look that said they wanted drama but didn't want responsibility. And there was someone recording. A young woman near the mailboxes held her phone up at chest height, screen glowing, thumb hovering over the comment stream. Ruth noticed the phone. Harold noticed the phone. Bradley noticed it too. And in that fraction of a second, his voice climbed even higher, as if the camera fed him. "This is private property," he announced. "And you were already given notice. You ignored it. That's on you." Harold's cane tapped once. Tap. A small sound that somehow made everyone quiet for half a beat. "We didn't ignore anything," Harold said. His voice was low. Not weak, just controlled. A voice that didn't need to win, because it had learned how to endure. Bradley snapped his fingers at the security guard standing nearby. "Marcus," he said sharply, like he was calling a dog. "We talked about this. They need to be removed." The guard, broad-shouldered, shaved head, dark uniform, shifted his weight. His name patch read Marcus. His eyes flicked to Harold's cane, to Ruth's trembling hands, to the quilt. "Sir," Marcus said, tone careful, "they're elderly. Maybe we should follow protocol," Bradley cut in. "Or do you want this on your file?" The live stream caught it all. The comments started pouring like rain. "This is disgusting. They've lived there 12 years. Property manager acting like a cartoon villain. Call the news. This is why PPL hate landlords." A door opened. Two uniformed police officers stepped into the lobby like the temperature had changed. "Got a call about trespassing," the taller one said. "Who's the complainant?" Bradley raised his hand immediately, the way kids do when they know the answer and want credit. "Me. They are refusing to leave." Ruth's fingers tightened around the quilt. "We're not refusing," she said. "You've been served," Bradley said over her. "This is unlawful occupancy." Harold's cane tapped again. Tap, as if it was marking time. The shorter officer approached Harold with the cautious impatience of someone used to people getting loud. "So," he said, "I need you to step outside." Harold didn't step. He didn't raise his voice, either. He simply reached into his coat pocket, slowly, so no one could mistake it for a threat. The officer's hand moved instinctively toward his belt. "Careful," he warned. Harold pulled out a folded envelope. Not a weapon, not even a stack of papers, just one envelope, creased at the edges, handled often. He held it out. The officer didn't take it yet. "What's that?" Harold looked at him with an expression that was almost gentle. "It's a number," he said. "A phone number. For our son. Bradley let out a harsh laugh that echoed off marble. Your son, he said, like the idea itself was offensive. What? He's gonna come down here and bully us into letting you stay. The live stream's comments sped up. Oh no, he said, bully who is the son? Plot twist incoming. Ruth swallowed. High eyes shimmered, but she kept her chin up like she had practiced dignity in front of mirrors. Harold didn't look at Bradley. He looked at the officer. Call him, Harold said. Please. The taller officer glanced at the phone held up by the young woman at the mailboxes, then at the growing circle of onlookers. He knew this was becoming something that could outlive the morning. So, he said, if you're being lawfully evicted. Harold's voice stayed calm, but something sharpened beneath it, like steel under cloth. We are not being lawfully evicted, he said. And the man who can explain why is my son. Bradley's smile thinned. Fine, he said, waving a hand. Call him. Let him hear you're getting removed. The shorter officer finally took the envelope. He unfolded it. His eyebrows lifted slightly at what he saw. Not the number. The letterhead printed faintly on the paper inside. He looked at Harold again. Really looked this time, like he had been handed a key and suddenly realized he might be in the wrong room. What is this? He asked quietly. Harold didn't answer. He only said, call him. And as the officer pulled out his own phone, thumb hovering over the digits, Ruth's hand slipped into Harold's free hand. Two old hands laced together like a prayer. In the lobby, the fountain kept gurgling softly, oblivious. And somewhere beyond that marble and brass and manufactured luxury, something old and quiet and patient began to turn. Because the number wasn't just a number. It was a fuse, and it had just been lit. The morning had started the way Harold Bennett's mornings always started, before the world remembered to be kind. He rose at 5, not because he had anywhere urgent to be, but because his bones didn't believe in sleeping late anymore. The apartment was dim, the city outside still holding its breath. Ruth was already awake. She lay on her side, eyes open, staring at the faint rectangle of light under the bedroom door, listening for the sounds of him moving. You don't have to get up, she whispered as Harold eased himself off the mattress. I know, he whispered back. He shuffled to the kitchen, careful not to wake the building with his cane. Their apartment in Caraway Heights wasn't big. It wasn't luxury, not really, not the way the brochures promised. But it had been theirs in the way home becomes yours. By repetition, by memory, by survival. Harold boiled water and set 2 chipped mugs on the counter. One had a faded blue flower. The other had the words "World's Best Dad" with the D almost worn away. He smiled at that mug every time. Not because he needed the validation, because it reminded him of the boy who once stood on a chair to reach the cabinet, laughing as if the world had never hurt him. Their son. Adopted. Yes, but the word had always felt too small for what he meant. They'd met him in a system that treated children like paperwork. He was 9, thin as a question mark, eyes too serious for his face. A social worker had called him highly intelligent, with the same tone someone might use to describe an inconvenience. He had been moved 3 times in 2 years. The file said behavioral issues. Harold had looked at the boy's hands, small fists clenched in his lap, and recognized a child who had learned to fight silence. Ruth had knelt in front of him, voice soft, and said, "What's your favorite thing in the whole world?" The boy had hesitated, then whispered, "When people keep their promises." That was all Ruth needed. They brought him home with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a stare that didn't trust kindness. They gave him a room, a desk, a library card, and what the system never could, time. Harold worked maintenance for the city then, long hours, no applause. Ruth cleaned offices downtown, scrubbing fingerprints off glass towers built by people who never noticed the hands that kept their world shining. They didn't have money, but they had steadiness. And their son had devoured steadiness like food. He stuttered at the kitchen table, pencil moving like it was trying to outrun the past. Harold would come home exhausted, shoulders aching, and find the boy still hunched over a book. "Go to bed," Harold would say. "I will after this chapter," the boy would answer, eyes bright. Ruth would set a plate of food beside him. Beans, cornbread, whatever they could stretch. "You need to eat," she'd say. He would eat with one hand and write with the other. Harold used to watch him and feel something like fear, not of failure, but of how quickly a life could change, how fragile hope was in a world that loved to snatch it back. The boy grew. He earned scholarships. He walked across stages in borrowed gowns. He learned the language of courts and statutes the way some people learned hymns. And through it all, he never forgot the kitchen table, never forgot the chipped mugs, never forgot the way Ruth held his face once when he cried over a rejection letter and said, "No door gets to tell you what you're worth." Years later, when he took his oath as a federal judge, he asked Harold and Ruth to stand beside him. The courtroom had been full of polished shoes and big titles. But the moment he looked at them, his parents, the room seemed to widen, as if making space for something true. After the ceremony, he hugged Ruth for a long time. "You did this," he whispered. Ruth had smiled against his shoulder. "We didn't do it," she said. "You did it. We just kept the light on." He visited often when his schedule allowed. He called every Sunday no matter where he was. He sent groceries when Ruth protested about money. He paid their rent without them asking when Harold's hours got cut. And still, Harold and Ruth lived simply, like people who knew wealth was loud but security was quiet. So when the letter slid under their door 3 weeks ago, Ruth had assumed it was another building notice, a maintenance schedule, a fire alarm test. She opened it at the kitchen counter while Harold brewed coffee. Her face had gone still. Harold noticed immediately. A lifetime of loving someone teaches you the smallest signals. "What is it?" he asked. Ruth handed him the paper. "Notice to vacate. Reason, lease violation. Unauthorized occupant. Non-compliance." Harold read it twice, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. "Unauthorized occupant," he said. Ruth's voice shook. "Who are they talking about?" They didn't have anyone living with them. No grandchildren. No cousins. No friends on the couch. Just them. Harold's throat tightened. They called the leasing office. Left messages. Went downstairs in person. The receptionist said Bradley Holt would get back to them. He didn't. Then came another notice. Then another. And this morning, just before dawn, Harold had stepped into the hallway to fetch the newspaper and found a sticker slapped on their door. Final notice. Ruth sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her mug, staring at the word final like it was a cliff. Harold kissed her forehead. "We're not going anywhere," he said quietly. Ruth looked up, eyes wet. "Harold," she whispered, "they can make us." Harold thought of all the times the world had tried to make him smaller. The schools that doubted him. The jobs that passed him over. The neighborhoods that watched him like a suspect. The landlords who raised rent because they could. He thought of his son in that courtroom, hand on a Bible, promising to uphold justice. He didn't want to drag his son into another fight. He didn't want to be the kind of parent who always needed rescuing. But he also knew something else. Silence was expensive, and they had already paid too much. So Harold did what he had always done. He dressed carefully, pressed his shirt, shined his shoes. Ruth wrapped the quilt around her shoulders as if gathering courage. And together, they walked downstairs to the lobby, not to beg, but to stand. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. The officer's phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone answered. The shorter officer turned slightly away, as if instinctively shielding the call from the crowd. "Hello," he said. "This is Officer Delgado with..." He stopped. His posture changed mid-sentence, like someone had tugged a string in his spine. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "Yes, understood." Bradley leaned toward him, impatient. "Well," he demanded, "tell him his parents need to leave." Delgado didn't look at Bradley. He listened, eyes widening slightly. "Yes, sir," he repeated. "I understand. We'll handle it." He ended the call. For a moment, the lobby went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The gurgling fountain sounded suddenly too loud. Bradley frowned. "What did he say?" Bradley asked. "Who is he?" Delgado swallowed. He looked at Harold, then Ruth, then the envelope in his own hand like it had become heavier. He said, Delgado began, then hesitated, glancing at his partner. "He said he's on his way." Bradley rolled his eyes. On his way from where? He snapped. This isn't a family meeting. We have a court order. Harold's gaze didn't flicker. Do you? Harold asked. Bradley's face flushed. Don't play games, he said. Marcus, escort them out. Marcus shifted again. Discomfort, Clay. So, Marcus said, voice low, maybe we should wait. If their son is. If their son is what? Bradley barked. A lawyer? A politician? I don't care if he's the mayor. They're out. The bystanders murmured. The livestream comments surged faster, as if the internet had smelled blood. He said, even if he's the mayor, OMG, this man is about to regret everything. Don't touch them, protect auntie and uncle. Ruth's lips parted, a tremor in her breath. Harold squeezed her hand. It's all right, he murmured, so softly only she could hear. Ruth looked up at him with a mixture of fear and faith, like she was standing on the edge of a bridge that only love could make solid. Bradley stepped closer to Harold, invading space the way some people use proximity as power. You people always think you can get special treatment, he hissed, voice low now. Dangerous. Rules apply to everyone. You mean some people, Ruth said, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her voice. Bradley's eyes snapped to her. What did you say? Ruth swallowed, but she didn't retreat. I said, she repeated, you mean some people. A hush fell. The young woman recording shifted her phone higher. The screen reflected in her glasses. She was fully live now. The taller officer warned, let's keep this calm. It is calm, Harold said. It has been calm. Bradley pointed at the box. You packed their stuff, he said to the officers, loud again. That's proof they are leaving. Harold turned his head toward the box. His face tightened, not with shame, but with something older. That box isn't ours, he said. Bradley blinked, thrown off. What? Harold's voice remained level. We didn't pack anything, he said. We came down here because your office wouldn't answer us. That box, he nodded once, is a prop. The crowd stirred. Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. Don't be ridiculous, he said quickly. It's labeled with your unit number. Harold looked at him. And who wrote it? Bradley's eyes flicked away for half a second. The livestream caught that flicker. The comments exploded. He got caught that side glance. They planted the box, this is evil. Marcus exhaled hard, like a man watching the edge of his job begin to crumble. So, Marcus said to Bradley, I saw maintenance bring that box down earlier. They. Shut up, Bradley snapped, face turning red. You don't know what you saw. Marcus's jaw clenched. He didn't speak again, but his eyes said plenty. Bradley turned to the officers. I want them removed, he demanded. Now. The taller officer hesitated, glancing at Delgado. Delgado's face was pale in a way it hadn't been minutes ago. Mr. Holt, the taller officer said carefully, can we see the paperwork? Bradley's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. Then he recovered with the arrogance of someone used to pushing past checks. Of course, he said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Hey. He thrust it at the officer, who opened it and scanned. Ruth watched their faces the way you watch doctors in a hospital hallway, reading the parts they don't say out loud. The officer's eyebrows knit. This says, lease violation, unauthorized occupant, he said. Bradley nodded briskly. Exactly. The officer flipped a page, and the occupant is listed as unidentified male. Bradley's jaw tightened. Yes, he said. They refused to disclose. Ruth's voice cracked, but she pushed through it. We were never asked, she said. No one came. No one called. They just sent papers. The officer looked up sharply. Is that true? He asked Bradley. Bradley's eyes flashed. They are lying, he said. They always. He stopped, because the lobby doors had opened again. And this time, the air shifted. A man entered in a dark overcoat, posture straight, stride measured. He wasn't in a hurry, but every step carried weight. He had a face that had been on television, not for celebrity but for something quieter and heavier, decisions. Rulings. Oaths. Behind him were two people in suits, staff, maybe, moving with the subtle urgency of those who knew how time works in courtrooms. The man's gaze scanned the lobby, landing on Ruth first. Then Harold. Something softened in his eyes, like a storm finding its center. He walked toward them. The crowd parted instinctively. The live stream angle adjusted, trying to keep him in frame. Someone in the back whispered, "Wait, is that?" The man reached Harold and Ruth. He didn't speak to Bradley. He didn't speak to the officers. He placed a hand gently on Ruth's shoulder. "Ma," he said, voice low but steady, "are you all right?" Ruth's eyes filled instantly. Her lips trembled. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're okay now." Bradley stared, confused, then irritated. "Excuse me," he snapped, stepping forward. "Who are you? This is a private matter." The man turned, and when he faced Bradley, the room seemed to tighten around the moment. "My name," he said, "is Judge Adrian Bennett." Silence. Not the polite kind. The stunned kind. The kind that drops like a heavy cloth over everything. Bradley's face froze mid-expression, mouth slightly open, eyes blinking too fast. The taller officer straightened as if pulled by invisible strings. Delgado looked like he might exhale for the first time in 10 minutes. The phone recording captured all of it. The shift, the shock, the way a single title could change gravity. Judge Bennett's voice remained calm. "And those," he said, gesturing toward Harold and Ruth, "are my parents." The livestream comments became a blur. "No way, federal judge." He said, "Federal bench, this is gonna be on the news. Bradley is done." Bradley swallowed hard. "You?" he stammered. You there." "Son," Judge Bennett finished, quiet. Bradley tried to recover, forcing a laugh that sounded like a broken instrument. "Well, Judge, this is," he spread his hands. "We're just enforcing policy. It's not personal." Judge Bennett looked at the box on the floor, then at the eviction notice folder in the officer's hands, then back at Bradley. "Not personal," he repeated, as if testing the words for truth. He turned slightly, addressing the officers. "May I see the paperwork?" he asked. The taller officer handed it over immediately, as if the folder had become a hot coal. Judge Bennett flipped through the pages with practice speed. His face didn't change much, but something in his jaw tightened, and Harold recognized it. He had seen that jaw before, on graduation days, on nights when his son stuttered until his eyes blurred, on the day a professor tried to dismiss him and his son politely dismantled the man's assumptions with facts. Judge Bennett stopped on one page. He held it up. "This signature," he said, voice even, "belongs to whom?" Bradley blinked. It's mine," he said, weak. Judge Bennett nodded slowly. "And this inspection report that claims an unidentified male was found residing in their unit," he continued. "Who authored it?" Bradley's throat worked. Our compliance team." Judge Bennett's gaze sharpened. "Names," he said. Bradley's eyes darted to the officers, then to the crowd, then to the phone screens. "I don't have." Judge Bennett held the paper steady. "Mr. Holt," he said, still calm, "this document contains assertions that, if false, constitute fraud. And fraud doesn't become less serious because it's printed on property management letterhead." A shiver went through the lobby. Marcus, the security guard, stared at Bradley like he was seeing him for the first time. Bradley's face drained. "Judge," he whispered, there must be a misunderstanding." Judge Bennett tilted his head slightly. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. He turned to Harold and Ruth. "Did anyone from the building ever enter your apartment?" he asked gently. Ruth shook her head. "No," she said. "No one came." Harold's voice was steady. "They didn't even knock," he said. Judge Bennett nodded. Then he looked at Bradley again. And the calm in his eyes was not mercy. It was clarity. "My parents have paid their rent on time for 12 years, he said. "They have complied with every term of their lease. They are not trespassers." Bradley tried to speak, but no sound came out. Judge Bennett took a slow breath. "And now," he said, voice carrying, "we're going to find out why you decided they didn't belong here." The hook was no longer a hint. It was a blade poised above the lie. The lobby doors opened again, this time for a woman in a tailored suit who looked like she belonged in boardrooms where people pretended money didn't smell like power. She hurried in, scanning faces, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw Judge Bennett, She stopped so abruptly her heels squeaked on marble. She ended the call instantly. "Judge Bennett," she said, voice tight with forced composure. "I'm Ms. Klein," Judge Bennett said, recognizing her before she finished. "General Counsel for Caraway Residential Holdings." The bystanders leaned in, sensing the story leveling up in real time. Ms. Klein's eyes flicked to Bradley like he was an exposed wire. "Yes," she said quickly. "I was notified there was an incident." Judge Bennett handed her the folder. "This is what your employee is using to remove my parents," he said. "I would like an explanation." Ms. Klein flipped through the papers. Her face changed line by line, color draining, lips tightening. "Mr. Holt," she said sharply, "did you authorize these notices?" Bradley's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I was following." "Answer," she snapped. Bradley's shoulders sagged. "Yes," he said. Ms. Klein's nostrils flared. "On what basis?" she demanded. Bradley's eyes darted toward Ruth and Harold, then away. He began, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to say the quiet part out loud. "They had complaints," he said finally. "From residents." "What complaints?" Ms. Klein pressed. Bradley's voice dropped. "Noise," he said. Ruth's eyes widened. "We don't even," she whispered, shocked. "We barely." Judge Bennett's voice cut through softly. "My mother sings hymns while she cooks," he said. "Is that the noise?" A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Bradley swallowed. "It's not just that," he muttered. Ms. Klein's eyes narrowed. "Then what?" she demanded. Bradley's gaze flicked, just for a second, to Harold's skin, Ruth's quilt, the cane. And in that flicker, the truth leaked. He didn't have to say it. Everyone saw it. The livestream comments became furious lightning. "He looked at their skin. We all saw that racism in 4K. This is why." Ms. Klein's voice went icy. "Mr. Holt," she said, "do you realize this building is under federal fair housing regulations?" Judge Bennett didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "I'm going to request preservation of all communications related to this lease violation. Emails, texts, internal messages. Anything deleted will be treated accordingly." Ms. Klein's eyes widened further. "Judge," she said carefully, "are you?" "I'm a son first," Judge Bennett said, gaze steady, "and a federal judge second. But do not confuse my calm for ignorance." The lobby was silent again. Even the fountains seemed quieter, as if intimidated. Judge Bennett turned to the officers. "These people are not trespassing," he said. "If you remove them based on fraudulent paperwork, you expose yourselves and your department to liability. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you." The taller officer nodded, throat bobbing. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "Understood." Delgado stepped toward Harold and Ruth, voice gentle. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett," he said, "I'm sorry. We're not going to remove you." Ruth let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for weeks. Harold's shoulders lowered slightly, as if his body finally allowed itself to believe. Bradley suddenly looked small, like a man watching his own authority evaporate. "But," he protested, voice cracking, "we have." Ms. Klein turned on him. "Be quiet," she hissed. "Just be quiet." Judge Bennett looked at the box again, then at Marcus. "Who brought that down here?" he asked. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Maintenance," he said, "on Mr. Holt's instruction." Bradley flinched. Judge Bennett nodded slowly. "Then we'll add fabrication to the list," he said, almost conversational. "Thank you." Bradley's knees looked unsteady. The reversal wasn't a shout. It was a door opening to reveal the entire machinery behind the cruelty. And in the bright light, it looked uglier than anyone had wanted to admit. The video hit the internet like a match to dry grass. Within an hour, it was on every local feed. By noon, national accounts were sharing it with captions that ranged from rage to disbelief. By evening, cable news panels were pausing the clip on Bradley's face, the moment his confidence collapsed, analyzing it like a crime scene. Caraway Residential Holdings released a statement that sounded like most corporate apologies: regretful, vague, allergic to accountability. But statements don't stop momentum. Receipts do. A former leasing agent from Caraway Heights, anonymous at first, then emboldened, sent screenshots to a journalist. Messages from Bradley in a staff chat. We need to clean up the tenant mix. Too many grandparents bringing down the vibe. Find violations. Push notices. Make it uncomfortable. Another message. Unit 14C. Bennett's, too visible. People ask questions. Start paperwork. The journalist published the screenshots. The next day, Caraway's stock dipped sharply in early trading. Not a collapse, but a bruise that told investors something was bleeding underneath. A city council member demanded an investigation into discriminatory housing practices. A fair housing advocacy group announced they were filing a complaint with federal agencies. Tenants organized in the building, forming a coalition, circulating petitions, demanding transparency. And in the middle of it all, amid the noise, the headlines, the outrage, Harold and Ruth sat at their kitchen table with 2 mugs and a paper bag of groceries their son had brought. Ruth's hand shook as she unfolded another letter. This one wasn't a notice. It was a formal apology signed by the CEO of Caraway Residential Holdings. Bradley Holt was suspended pending investigation, then terminated. But it didn't stop there, because institutions rarely rot in just one spot. A week later, reports surfaced about other tenants, black, elderly, disabled, who had received sudden violation notices, sudden rent hikes, sudden policy changes. People who had been pushed quietly, not loudly, so no one would record. Now they had voices. Now they had proof. A class action lawsuit began to form, led by tenants who had been intimidated into silence for years. Investigators requested building records. Emails were subpoenaed. Internal communications were combed through like a crime scene. And Caraway Residential Holdings, once so proud of its polished marble and brass letters, found itself exposed in fluorescent light. 2 weeks after the lobby incident, the building hosted a mandatory tenant meeting in the community room. Folding chairs, stale coffee, tension thick as dust. Ms. Klein sat at the front beside a new interim property manager whose hands kept fidgeting with a pen. On the wall behind them, someone had tried to hang a banner that read, "We hear you," but it looked like a joke in the wrong font. Harold and Ruth sat in the second row. Judge Bennett sat beside them. Not in a robe, not on a bench. Just a man in a simple suit, hands folded, eyes steady. The room was packed. People who had watched the video came in person now, curious to see what the couple looked like outside a screen. Some faces were ashamed. Some were angry. Some were relieved, like the truth had finally been given permission to exist. Ms. Klein cleared her throat. "We want to acknowledge," she began, voice rehearsed, "that mistakes were made." A woman in the back stood up. "Mistakes?" she said sharply. "You tried to throw them out like trash." A murmur of agreement swept through. Ms. Klein's face tightened. "We are cooperating with authorities," she said quickly, "and we are implementing new training." Harold raised his hand. The room quieted, not because he demanded it, but because something in his stillness commanded respect. Ms. Klein swallowed. "Yes, Mr. Bennett," she said. Harold stood slowly, cane steadying him. He looked around the room at faces, some friendly, some guarded, some guilty. Then he spoke. "I don't have fancy words," Harold said. "I've never been good at speeches." A few people shook their heads, as if to say, "You don't need fancy words." Harold continued. "I've been called a lot of things in my life," he said. "Some of them I deserved. Most of them I didn't." His voice didn't tremble. It carried the way a hymn carries, soft, but certain. "When we moved into this building, my wife said we should make ourselves small. Not because we wanted to," he said, glancing at Ruth, "but because we knew what happens when people like us take up space where we're not expected." Ruth's eyes shimmered. Harold looked back at the room. "And then they sent us that notice. And then another. And then they put a box in the lobby like we were already gone," he said, pausing. "Do you know what that does to a person?" Silence answered. Harold's jaw tightened slightly. "It makes you question your own right to exist quietly," he said, "to breathe without asking permission." He took a slow breath. "I'm grateful my son has the title he has," he said, and a ripple moved through the room. "Not because it makes me better than anyone else, It doesn't. Titles don't change a soul. He looked at Ms. Klein. But titles do something else, he said. They make people listen. And that's the problem. He turned to the tenants. Because if my son didn't sit where he sits, Harold said, voice thickening, who would have listened to us? A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Harold let the question hang, not as accusation, but as truth. Then he said, I don't want revenge. Bradley's name wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. Harold's eyes scanned the room. I want accountability, he said. And I want kindness to stop being something you give only when it's safe. He tapped his cane lightly once on the floor. Tap. A punctuation mark. My wife and I have been paying rent on time for 12 years, he said. We've smiled in elevators at people who never smiled back. We've stepped aside so others wouldn't feel threatened by our presence. We've lived like guests in a place we paid for. His voice rose slightly, not with anger, but with conviction. And I'm done living like a guest in my own life, he said. A quiet of agreement rolled through the room. Harold's gaze softened again. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for us, he said. I'm asking you to see each other. Not when a camera is on. Not when a famous title walks in the door. But when it's just you and your neighbor in the hallway. He paused, letting the room breathe. Because if you can only do the right thing when you're being watched, he said, then the right thing isn't in you yet. That line landed like a bell. Harold looked down at Ruth, then back up. My mother used to tell me, he said quietly, that dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you carry, even when they try to strip it off. His eyes glistened, but his voice held. So I'm going to keep carrying it, he said. And I hope, when you see someone being pushed out of place, you'll carry yours too. He sat back down slowly. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone began to clap. One clap became many. Not loud, not performative, steady, like rain that finally decides to fall. Judge Bennett didn't clap the loudest. He just looked at Harold the way sons look at fathers when they finally understand the cost of quiet strength. Spring arrived in the city like a cautious apology. The trees outside Caraway Heights began to bud, green pushing through branches that had looked dead all winter. But the building felt different now. Not because the marble had changed, or the brass letters. Because the people had. A tenants association met twice a month in the community room. Not because they were bored, but because they had learned what happens when you stop assuming someone else will handle it. A bulletin board near the mailboxes, once filled with lost dog flyers and yoga schedules, now held resources, fair housing information, legal aid contacts, meeting notes. Caraway Residential Holdings, under pressure, announced an overhaul of their complaint and eviction procedures. An independent audit was commissioned. A third-party compliance monitor was assigned for a full year. The lawsuit continued, slow and heavy as justice often is. Some tenants moved out anyway, exhausted by the trauma. Some stayed, determined to make the place less cruel for whoever came next. Marcus, the security guard, was promoted, not by the company's generosity, but because tenants insisted he deserved it for telling the truth when it mattered. Ms. Klein resigned 3 months after the incident. The interim manager was replaced by someone who, at minimum, understood that power without humanity is just another kind of violence. And Harold and Ruth, they stayed in Unit 14C, not because they won a battle, because they refused to lose their home. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Ruth stood in the kitchen humming softly as she stirred a pot of greens. The hymns returned to the apartment, not as quiet defiance anymore, but as rightful sound. Harold sat at the table, reading the newspaper with his cane propped beside him. A knock came at the door. Harold rose slowly, opened it. Judge Bennett stood there with a grocery bag in one hand and a small potted plant in the other. Ruth laughed from the kitchen. You keep bringing food like we don't know how to eat, she called out. Judge Bennett smiled. I'm ensuring my continued access to your cooking, he called back. He set the plant on the counter. What's that? Ruth asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Peace lily, he said. I read they are resilient. Hard to kill. Harold chuckled. Sounds familiar, he said. Judge Bennett looked at them, his parents, moving through their small kitchen with the ease of people who had survived worse than a landlord's cruelty. He didn't say I'm sorry anymore. He didn't say I'm proud either. He said something else, something true. Thank you, he said quietly. Ruth paused, eyes narrowing playfully. For what? For teaching me, he said, that dignity isn't loud. Harold nodded once, as if that was the only appropriate response. Later, as the sun lowered and the city softened, Judge Bennett sat on their couch, listening to Ruth tell a story about her first job cleaning offices, about a woman who once left a note on her cart that said, "I see you." Ruth's voice caught as she recounted it, even decades later. People think little things don't matter, she said softly. But that note, it carried me. Judge Bennett looked out the window at the building across the street, at the lights turning on one by one. He thought of the lobby, of the box, of the word eviction written like a threat. He thought of how quickly the world believed Harold and Ruth didn't belong, until a title walked in. And he thought of all the people who never get that reversal. The ones who don't have a son with influence. The ones whose humiliation happens off camera. The ones whose boxes sit in lobbies where no one records. He turned back to Harold and Ruth, and he promised himself, again, that the bench would never make him forget the kitchen table. If you were in that lobby, coffee in hand, earbuds in, phone in your pocket, would you have spoken up before the title was revealed? Would you have believed them when they were just an elderly couple holding a quilt and a cane? Or would you have waited for proof that they mattered? And when the next person is being quietly pushed out of place, at work, in a store, on your street, what will it take for you to decide they belong?